processing of our taconite here. It makes no sense, quite frankly, to be sending our taconite to Cleveland and to China and all over the globe. We need an initiative here to start processing steel right up here in Minnesota's 8th Congestion District, where the iron ore is located. Again, creating jobs. And there's so many other things. You know, you voted against expanding alternative energy solutions. Every windmill has like 335 tons of steel in it. They have like 5 tons of copper in it. That's the kind of initiative that we as a nation should be investing in. Again, creating more demand for more steel. That's how you create jobs. That's how you create a sustainable steel industry.
1 minute follow-up.
And regarding the infrastructure bill that Congressman talked about, we actually passed an infrastructure bill. We passed a highway bill after 9 extensions. The previous Congress, the 111th Congress, had a Democratic House, a Democratic Senate with filibuster group, and a Democratic president. They couldn't pass a transportation bill. We did. And it took a lot of wrangling. It was an 18-hour committee meeting. I think it was one of the longest committee meetings. 18-hour committee meeting. I was a conferee on the transportation bill. We worked together and got a transportation bill done. It's interesting to note, the previous transportation bill had 6,400 earmarks in it. This transportation bill had none, and we managed to work together to get it done, to get the country back on track, get our infrastructure that's so badly needed worked upon.
I want to ask a question that's very close to the heart of many of the young people in this audience. In 2009, that's the most recent data available, 67% of graduates had debt averaging $24,000 per student. It is higher now. It was up 6% then from the previous year. Private school debt's even higher. College debt has surpassed credit card debt in America. What can you do as a congressman to help those students? We begin with Mr. Nolan.
Well, I'm the immediate past volunteer president of the Central Lakes Community College, so I know a little bit about what we raise scholarship money for students of all ages. So I know a little bit about how students are struggling, and I have 10 grandchildren as well that live here in the 8th District, and the oldest of which is looking at college as we speak. President Bill Clinton was in Duluth yesterday, and he talked at great length about this. And President Obama has submitted a program to change the student loan program and cut $60 billion out of it in bonuses that were going to banks, and turning that over to the Department of Education, who would make those student loans directly. And in the process, that will be taking effect here in the next year. And in the process, that will lower the student debt, the repayment for a student by $1,300 for each $1,000 in each $10,000 in student debt. So in the case you're talking about, that would lower the repayments for up to 20 years for a typical student loan in the $24,000 category. Now, secondly, the repayment would also be based not on the normal payment schedule, but be based on your income. So if you took a job as a doctor in a rural hospital where the income wasn't as great, or teaching in a school where the salaries weren't as good, you wouldn't have to pay as high a percentage of your income. Now, Chip, you under the Ryan budget plan have voted to do away with that. In addition, you voted to cut another $115 billion out of our educational funding.
Mr. Cravaack.
Only in Washington, by voting not to have an increase, is it considered a decrease. The Pell Grants have gone up 139% over the last 4 years. But Pell Grants are symptomatic of a problem. The problem is the cost of education. Now, we all realize that healthcare costs have gone up significantly over the last couple of years. Since 1982, I believe, to 2007, I think the report said, healthcare costs have gone up 250%. Well, education costs during that same time period have gone up over 400%. Now, there's a reason for that. Now, take a look at what some of the expenditures that some of our colleges and institutions spend on. They're spending, if you take a look at it, 15-person hot tubs, making sure mahogany windows have leaded glass, things like that, and professors maybe teaching 8 to 9 hours a week. I told that to a high school student, or a high school teacher. He just about fainted. So if we're asking our military to take $1 trillion in cuts over the next 10 years to find efficiencies, which I think are a little bit too deep, my opinion. But we should be asking our colleges that are having a little bit spending on the wrong things, and ensuring that we spend the money on the child in the classroom so that they can be educated with the training and techniques that they are going to need to be a productive member in our workforce. That's what we should be concentrating our money on.
Mr. Nolan, have you got a rebuttal?
Yeah, Chip, you were the beneficiary of a publicly paid for education, a great education, probably worth $500,000 at the Naval Academy, and I know that you were deserving and that you earned that, and I applaud you for that.
Thank you.
But for you to turn around and vote against Pell Grants for low-income and medium-income kids to go to college, when the cost of a community college education now is up to $7,000, and trust me, there are no hot tub programs here at Mesabi Community College. I've been through this college, and they have, by the way, one of the finest engineering programs. Has become a model for the country. But it's costing $7,000 a year now for a student to live at home and go to a community college. And we're putting a college education out of the reach of an average person. We need to start investing more money in our kids and our education.
And Mr. Cravaack, 1 minute.
Now, I will agree, the cost of education has increased dramatically. We need to bring the cost of education down, but once again, even the president said that the Pell Grants were on unstable footing and it needed to be reformed. I agree with the president on this one.
And he reformed it too, good for him.
Okay, and in regards, I appreciate your comments in regards to the United States Naval Academy. You realize, both as congressmen, that we do nominate men and women to go to the academies. But I do take exception with your comment that you said I was on the public dole all of my life, being a military member. I did take exception to that, and I do not think the men and women that serve in our armed forces are on the public dole. They're an essential part of our fighting forces, and they're an essential part of making sure that we have a protected nation.
We got off topic a little bit there, but that happens. We promised all of you out in the audience that we would take some questions, and the students have been collecting those questions. I thank you. We have a whole handful here. So we'll be looking at these questions together, gentlemen. The first question is from Stephanie of Hibbing. She says, and it's on the right topic. He says, Minnesota students pay the 3rd highest tuition and fees in the country at public two-year colleges. What will you do to make college more affordable? And I think it is Congressman Cravaack's turn to start.
Again, thank you, Stephanie, for your question, and it's apropos. How do we make it? Part of it is working with the state for public institutions on seeing what efficiencies we can make within the different colleges to get costs down, because the bottom line is we have to get costs down. The trajectory of spending and costs for colleges is just astronomical. The president, like I said, has even come out and said it is unsustainable, the trajectory we're on. We have to create efficiencies so that we can do the most important thing that any parent can do, and that's educate your children, so that when they go out into the workforce, they can have a viable trade, a viable profession, and be a productive citizen of the United States.
Mr. Nolan?
Not just a few years ago, the United States was first in the world in the number of college students who graduated from universities, and we've recently dropped to 16th. And it's largely because it's just unaffordable for so many people to even contemplate and think about going to college. And that's because we've been cutting funding for our universities and passing the burden on to the students. When I went to the university, it cost us $100 a quarter because our parents had put money into the university system. And we got to start funding our education. We spent $1 trillion in the war in Iraq. That was enough right there to fund all the student loans in America for the last 10 years. It's about priorities.
And the Debate Minnesota has decided not to do rebuttals on the questions from the audience, so we'll continue with the next question, for which you'll get each 1 minute. This is from Barbara Mahoney of Duluth. What will you do to preserve Pell Grant funding? And we start with you, Mr. Nolan.
Well, I'll fund them, that's what I'll do. The congressman has voted to cut funding for Pell Grants, and according to the analysis that I've seen, that is denying funds for some 23,000 students here in just the state of Minnesota alone. And more importantly, the president did propose some very nice reforms for the Pell Grant program that are saving us a lot of money and making more affordable loans available to more students. Now, there's more that we can do. We need to start funding our universities and our colleges and our elementary and secondary schools, but particularly at the college level, so that the students are constantly not being expected to pay the price with ever-increasing tuition. There's nothing more important, you're right, than the education of our children. That's where our economic future is, that's where opportunities lie. That's where we need to start investing money, not being the world's policeman.
Mr. Cravaack.
And again, only Washington does, not getting an increase equal a cut in regards to that. Funding for Pell Grants, the amount of that the actual student actually received has not changed, but we had to plateau it. We're $16 trillion in debt. 16 trillion, to put that kind of in perspective, a billion seconds ago, we were all 31 years younger. A trillion seconds ago was 31,688 years. We are deeply, deeply in debt, and we have to find the efficiencies. If we don't get our economy and get jobs rolling back in the 8th district, it doesn't matter how well educated our children are going to be, because they're not going to have jobs. So the essence is, like even the president said the Pell Grant was on unstable footing, and we need to have a corrective action. But the bottom line is, these young people need jobs once they graduate, so they're not living in your basements.
Our next question comes from Bill of Ely. He says, where do you stand on Mitt Romney's stand on turning over FEMA and the federal government disaster relief to the individual state? And the question first goes to Mr. Cravaack.
I'd have to take a look at that proposal a little bit more. That was read, there's really nothing hard in stone. Or right now, of course, with the Duluth floods, FEMA responded pretty well in making sure that the public infrastructure was addressed. We tried to have a little bit more because it affected very many of our homes and private residences. But at the same time, they were there, they responded, they were quick. But I'd really have to defer and wait until I see some hard language, what Governor Romney has to say.
Mr. Nolan?
No, I would be strongly opposed to that. What we're witnessing here in the northeastern United States, what we witnessed here in northeastern Minnesota, what we witnessed in Louisiana and New Orleans clearly requires a federal response where you can pull together the assets of a region to move quickly and to protect lives and to help these communities that have been devastated to rebuild. And FEMA, everybody's always complaining about government this and government that, until we need it. You come across a car accident on the highway and you see the highway patrol and the state patrol and you see the rescue squad and you see the ambulance and you see the helicopter coming in to take people to the hospital, and everybody knows what they're doing and they're saving lives. It's doggone useful and to have a good government there when you need it. The people in the Northeast need it now, and we needed it up here in the Northeast here a year ago or earlier this year, and I would not turn it over to the states.
All right, our next question comes from Patty in Cook. Patty asks, what is the role of a congressman in working with state legislators and local officials? Our first question now goes to Mr. Nolan.
You know, there are a couple different roles for a good member of Congress. One is you're there to vote on the great issues of our time. Do we go to war? Do we save Medicare? Do we give more tax breaks to the rich? Do we refocus on rebuilding the economy from the middle out and up, or trickle down from the rich? But in addition to that, a good congressman has to be an advocate for his district. Chip, I was shocked to learn here just recently, I was talking with the mayor of Duluth, and he was telling me how he has sent you 3 letters. He has asked numerous times to have a meeting with you to talk about projects that are important to the city of Duluth, and he hasn't been able to get a response. That's the kind of thing I hear all the time when I'm traveling around the district. You've got to be an advocate for your community. You've got to be an advocate for your business. You've got to make sure that you do everything you can to roll up your sleeves and make sure things get done for people and communities here in this district.
Mr. Cravaack.
I think we actually resembled exactly what Patty was talking about. For our Boundary Water Canoe Area School Land Swap, we've been working on a bill for over a year. And when the state legislator and the governor signed a different bill, we completely trashed ours and completely adopted the state's bill and moved it forward through committee, through subcommittee, committee, and then also on the House floor for a very interesting debate on the House floor to get it passed and sent over to the Senate, where it is in hover mode. So hopefully our senators will pick that up. In regards to the mayor you're referring to, we replied to the mayor and reminded him of some correspondences that we did send him that he must have forgotten about, and some telephone calls that we documented as well. So we are very responsive to all the mayors. We've had 4 mayor roundtables, and over 400 mayors have been invited to these roundtables.
All right, Cal and Evelyn asks, is the EPA overreaching its scope? Are the MPCA rules sufficient to protect our environment while adding new mining projects like polymetal twin metals? And this question goes first to you, Mr. Cravaack.
I think the EPA is dramatically overreaching in a case in point in a couple different areas. One is Minnesota Pollution Control is working very well with the mines on regards to a haze issue. Minnesota Pollution Control worked with the mines, everything was fine. The EPA swoops in and said, this is going to have to be done in 18 months. Well, it's practically impossible to put the type of low NOx burners on the individual furnaces that are in our mines. This may cost jobs. What we did in response is we created a bill and dropped a bill that puts a 10-year moratorium on any type of EPA regulation that would try to impose a haze standard, which is the leads are supposed to be the states, and we dropped that bill to prevent that occurring.
Mr. Nolan.
You know, again, I've talked with the mining companies up here. They don't have a problem meeting the regulations. They believe in clean air and clean water, and they believe in protecting our forests and our great outdoors. Yes, that is the fact. What they do is they have a problem with how long the process takes, and we need to do some work there. But the way you get things done in Washington is by rolling up your sleeves, not by coming home and hitting the campaign trail. Of course there's opposition to anything and everything that anyone tries to do. But again, you know, your little your land swap bill, I applaud you for making the effort. But again, you didn't have any bipartisan support. You didn't have any serious companion legislation on the Senate side. That's not going to go anywhere. You know, you have a record of just, you know, having a hearing, having a meeting, throwing a bill in there, kind of all show and no go. And that's not how you get stuff done. You roll up your sleeves and you stay there and you work until you reach agreement.
All right, moving on to our next question. It's from Jewel in Babbitt. She asks, what is the role of the EPA? Do you see, and so it's sort of continuing this question, do you as a candidate see any correlations between the coal industry in America and the future of mining in Minnesota? And our first question goes to Mr. Nolan.
I'm going to answer a question you talked about here a little bit earlier. The EPA has done a relatively good job of giving us clean air and clean water. And in the process, back in the 70s and the 80s, all the economic analysts said that it created more jobs than anything. Chip, the fact is, we were looking at acid rain destroying our lakes and our forest up here. But guess what? We had some regulations, but someone had to build the scrubbers. Someone had to install the scrubbers. Somebody has to maintain the scrubbers. Somebody has to replace the scrubbers that took the sulfuric emissions out of our air. In Detroit, someone had to construct the catalytic converters. Somebody had to build them, to maintain them, to replace them. The fact is, the environmental industry has been a very, very strong component of creating jobs here in this country. Now, again, we need to expedite the process, but if you can't sit here and say that environmental rules and regulations have not created jobs. On the contrary, they have.
Mr. Cravaack.
Just a comment on rolling up your sleeves, and I agree with that. We did roll up our sleeves. As a freshman member, we have 2 red line bills that have gone through the House, through the Senate, and signed by the President, which actually is quite unprecedented. In regards to, Julie, I appreciate the comment regarding coal. There is a war on coal, and this war on coal is going to directly affect taconite mining. And the reason why I say that is the 2 power plants, Tack Harbor and also Laskin Power Plant in Hoyt Lakes, by the way, which pays over 70% of the property taxes in Hoyt Lakes, $810,000. The 2 coal plants also provide each one individually 50% of their power goes to taconite generation. If these 2 coal power plants get shut down, and that's what the EPA is trying to do through Minnesota Commerce, get shut down, our taconite mining costs are going to escalate, which means that our taconite is going to be less competitive and people are going to be out of work. So we've also put a moratorium, or fighting that battle as well.
All right, we have a good question next, but somebody didn't put their name on it. You should have. It's a good question. It's both candidates, both of you guys, have said Washington is somehow broken. Do nothing Congress. What needs to be done to get things moving and to fix this so-called broken Washington? And our first question goes to you, Mr. Cravaack.
Good question. I share your frustration in Congress. I've got a little plaque on my wall, and I take off. There's an X on it. It says "Bang Head Here." So it is very frustrating. But you're half right, if I may interject. You're half right. The House has passed several bills, bipartisan nature. They have been passed. They go over to the Senate, and Harry Reid does not bring them up. I think there's 39 of them now. One of them will directly affects our paper mills. So, but these 39 bills are sitting over the Senate. The Senate leader has the option to bring it to the floor. I'm saying, let the bill fall or fail or succeed on its own merit, but at least, Senator Reid, please allow for the open, honest debate of the bill, because these are jobs bills. These means jobs in America, and it's going to affect the 8th District of Minnesota. So,
Mr. Nolan.
Well, I think we really truly need to change the way we do our politics. It seems as though everybody's raising money and campaigning, and very few people are doing very little governing. I quite frankly think we need to reverse Citizens United, to take the perverse influence that all this big money is having in politics. And quite frankly, I think a federal election should be publicly funded so that representatives are beholden to the public, not the most well-financed special interests. And secondly, I see no reason why we can't put some restrictions on the time that campaigns last. Right now, they start the day after the last election, and most developed countries with progressive democracies, have a 60, 90-day election contest. But beyond that, I'm able to keep my seniority. I've spent a lifetime bringing people together in volunteer community service, in business, in government, in politics. I wouldn't be running if I didn't think I could make a difference. I think Congress needs to go to work. I think they have to spend more time getting to know one another, building some respect for one another, finding where the areas of compromise can be reached, and rolling up their sleeves and getting things done.
Chuck from Embarrass asks, Head Start is a program that has helped preschool children be ready to learn when they enter kindergarten. How would you support Head Start and other preschool programs for underserved children? And we start with Mr. Nolan.
Well, I directed a 19-unit, 3-county Head Start program here in the 8th District some years ago. It's just a truly wonderful program, and we discovered so many ways that we could improve the educational performance and capability of young people in preparing and getting ready for college, getting ready for grade school and high school. There are so many different learning disabilities and disadvantages that children have that make them ill-prepared for entering into elementary and secondary school. And Head Start is just a wonderful, wonderful way of making those discoveries and providing whatever kind of assistance is needed for those young people to be able to go to school and to learn and to realize their full potential. I would definitely call for greater funding for Head Start. I think Head Start and early childhood are just two of the best ways that we can ever invest our public funds and our public money.
Mr. Nolan? Mr. Cravaack? He already had his turn.
We're twins. Head Start is a good program, but the thing is, the efficiencies right now of the Congress, we have to be very selective on how we spend our money. We have to find the efficiencies where we can find them. Right now, we've had 4 straight trillion-dollar deficits, or $16 trillion in debt. 46% of our debt is foreign-owned. 30% of that is owned by China. We have to be very selective on how we create our efficiencies. And Head Start shows the efficiencies that can prove that they have, that childhood development is they're doing great things. I'm all for it. But remember, every program that is over and considered in deficit spending, we're borrowing that child's future away from them. So it better be significant.
John Forrest from Keewatin asked this question. How do you stand on the U.S. Senate plan to rescue the U.S. Postal Service? And this time I mean Mr. Cravaack.
All the easy ones, huh? The Postal Service right now, I'm talking to the Postmaster General, is obviously working in the red. They have an impossible task. The technology has changed dramatically from people writing letters to using emails. The paradigm has shifted significantly. And we have to create efficiencies. Some of the things that we were looking at was taking some of the more senior members that are in the Postal Service and giving them a pretty healthy package of asking them to retire, which seemed very positive in some of the union members that we had spoken with. But we have to start creating efficiencies within the Postal Service because just technology has changed. And I look forward to leadership of the Postmaster General in making those decisions.
All right, Mr. Nolan?
When I was a young man, well, first of all, my father worked for the post office for 47 years. And when I was a young man and my father learned I was going to spend some time in government and politics, he said, son, if you just do a few things, I'll always be proud of you. It kind of symbolizes, Chip, the good and the bad of politics. He says, number one, I want you to always be honest, son. And secondly, he said, I want you to work for the common people and the common good. Don't worry about the rich. They got a way of taking care of themselves. And then he said, don't ever vote against the Postal Service. So I just feel that the Postal Service has been one of the best things that ever happened to this country. I know that the Postal Service to small towns is something that's very important. It makes more sense to drop the mail off at one small post office than it does to have everybody in that town, driving 30 or 40 miles to the nearest town with a big post office. So that's how we communicate. That's how we get our information from one another. And I am a very, very strong proponent and supporter of the U.S. Postal Service.
All right, Jerry from Duluth asks, We were warned the last time the debt ceiling was raised that our credit rating would be lowered. Under what circumstance would you raise the debt ceiling? Mr. Nolan.
Well, that's one of the toughest votes you ever have to cast, and for the last 50, 60 years, I don't think it's ever passed by more than one vote. And it's so easy for anyone to sit there, and I know I can certainly say it, those aren't my spending priorities. If we're up to me, we wouldn't have this kind of debt. We wouldn't have gotten involved in that war in Iraq. We wouldn't have spent that $1 trillion in Afghanistan. We wouldn't have built that new base in Okinawa. So it's so easy for anyone and everyone to say, I'm not going to raise that debt ceiling. But the fact is, you know, the government of the United States, the people of the United States have obligated themselves to that debt, whatever it is. And the failure to acknowledge that and raise the debt ceiling to make it necessary to pay for that is just totally irresponsible. It could cause just a total financial collapse of our whole economic system, not to pay those bills that you've obligated your government and your people to pay.
Mr. Cravaack.
I had to have two lists of the postmaster. One is the paymaster, and the other one is the doc. Don't mess with those guys either. But in regards to, you know, there are no blank checks. I found that early on as a freshman in Congress. You cannot keep on writing blank checks to the United States government and keep on kicking the can down the road and say, well, it wasn't my expense, therefore, you know, I've got to write it off. We cannot continue kicking the can down the road. We are going to run into a financial crisis that you're seeing in Greece, Portugal, Spain, and Italy. We're already at 105% debt to GDP ratio. Greece is 158%. Under the president's budget, it screams past Greece. We have to be adults about this. There are no blank checks. So with any raising of the debt, there has to be with it spending cuts that eliminate deficit spending along with debt reduction. That's the only way to get out of this mess.
All right, our next question comes from Charles at Fairbanks. He asks, what is your position on the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan? And we start with Mr. Cravaack.
I've gone on record, it's time to come out of Afghanistan. I think it's time, the rules of engagement are not such that our troops can fight a full-fledged war. I do not want to see another trooper at the top of the Capitol steps that shake hands with and we thank for their service as they're missing their limbs. One of the most significant moments that I remember and really struck home to me, I'm walking up the steps and here's a young sailor, actually was EOD. He had both legs missing and both of his arms missing and had a mechanical arm that was shaking our hands when we went through. It's time to bring those guys and gals home and let the Afghans be able to defend themselves.
Mr. Nolan.
Well, we apparently have found some agreement here as well.
That's three.
Not three. I believe we should bring the troops home now. And, you know, please beware, everyone. We've heard a lot of people say, well, I think we should bring the troops home as soon as possible. To John McCain, that might mean 20 or 30 years from now. So, as soon as possible is the key word there. I believe we need to bring them home now, and I gather that Congressman Cravaack agrees with me on that.
All right, now before we go to our closing statements, that you'll each have 1 minute for, we'd like to acknowledge that today's debate was made possible through the financial support of the Otto Bremer Foundation, Prairie Island Indian Community, and Target Corporation. We'd like to thank Mesabi Range Community and Technical College for hosting this debate on your lovely campus, even if you don't have a hot tub. And all the Minnesota State University Student Association volunteers. Thanks also to Minnesota Public Radio for recording today's debate, which will air Thursday, November 1st at noon, and to the Uptake for live streaming the debate online. Of course, also to all of the television, radio, print media, as well as the bloggers and tweeters in the audience. On a personal note, the founder of Debate Minnesota, Will Hadelin, died last month. We honor his legacy by carrying on this important mission. Most importantly, we thank all of you in our audience here in Virginia and those watching on My 9, and remind you that if you want to watch the debate again, we will replay it in its entirety tonight on My 9 at 7 p.m. On now to our closing statements, and Mr. Cravaack won the coin toss, and so we'll go.
Actually, I lost.
You lost, but you chose to go first, right?
No.
No, Mr. Nolan goes first. Get
He
that?
won the first two, and I won the last one.
Oh,
so he
that's
goes
how that
first, and
works.
I get to go last.
Okay, you get to go. Well, go ahead, take the floor.
Well, I thank everybody for coming here today. I truly appreciate the opportunity. I'd like to thank Barbara. Thank you for being an excellent moderator. Very much appreciate that. Wasabi College here, appreciate your extending your hospitality to us as well. And Congressman Nolan, our fourth and final debate. It's been a heck of a season. I know at times have been tough. Everything from gas, groceries to education has gone up in price. But that is what we have. Is we have a plan for moving forward. Our plan is a little bit different than Congressman Nolan's. Congressman Nolan has a plan. It's a little bit more of an antiquated style of government. It's bigger government, more spending, more regulation, and I think more deficit, more debt, and more decline. We have a plan of moving forward, a positive growth plan. Well, I know we're not going to solve all the problems here tonight. I know it's going to take a lot of work to get our people back to work and our economy back on track. I humbly and respectfully ask for your vote to report for duty once again in January of next year and have the honor and the privilege to serve the men and women of the 8th. Thank you.
Mr. Nolan.
Thank you very much. You know, in some respects, I guess I do want to go back to the past, like the Clinton years, when we had balanced budgets and surpluses and full employment. We weren't involved in any wars around the country, and we were taking care of the human needs here in this country, and the middle class was strong. We have a very, very clear choice in this election contest. Clearly, we have to balance our budgets. We have to get this country back to work and get it back on track. But we have a very, very different plan and agenda for doing that. Congressman Cravaack would do away with Medicare as we know it. He would provide more tax cuts for the super rich. He would provide more tax cuts for companies to move their jobs offshore. And he's made it clear that he would also like to see the privatization of Social Security. We have about as clear a choice as we have ever had in an election contest. And I too ask for your vote, ask for your support, and I thank you for all the consideration you've all given both of us here in this election contest.